that's not age appropriate. It's a phrase we've all heard and maybe even used. But when it comes to aging, those two words can be more harmful than helpful. They imply limits that don't really exist and expectations that keep people from realizing what's truly possible as they grow older. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, an exercise physiologist with a passion for making science simple and life better as we age, with my co-host, Corbin Bruton. In this episode, we tackle one of the most pervasive and misleading ideas in our culture, the concept of age appropriate. We'll discuss how it shapes our attitudes towards exercise, nutrition, body composition, sleep, and even social connection, and why it's time to replace that phrase with something that actually supports aging well at every stage of life. The Aging Well podcast encourages informed decision-making and always consult your physician and scientific literature when making decisions about your health.
Dr. Armstrong, we hear the term age appropriate used all the time in fitness, fashion, relationships, and even hobbies. So why do you think that this phrase has become so accepted, and what's wrong with the assumption behind it?
I'm honestly not sure why it has gotten so accepted. Personally, I think it is a horrible phrase, and there's so much wrong with the assumptions behind it. It assumes that as we age, we're all on this same linear path, either up or down, however you want to describe it, that we're all changing at the same rate, and that chronological age is correlative with, how we should behave ourselves and how we can behave ourselves. And, from across the board, I can see in certain situations where we might be able to address a certain level of age appropriateness, and we might talk a little bit about in terms of fashion and some of those types of things. But even then, I who am I to put on someone restrictions on how they should behave or how they can behave or function just simply based on their age?
You don't think that has anything to do with society?
Well, it has everything to do with society. That's the problem. It's like society has put these concepts into place, and why? There's no natural reason for it. It's just whether it's, the media, your fashion magazines, your fitness magazines. Certainly there's influencers. We've countered numerous times on this podcast some of the stupid YouTube videos that you might see out there, people telling you, after the age of 50, these are exercises you should not do or cannot do. And it's like, who are you to tell me what I can't do over the age of 50 or 60?
Gotcha. Okay, so when people talk about being age appropriate, are they actually reflecting biology, or do you think they're reflecting a cultural expectation about aging then?
I think it's entirely a cultural expectation. There are certain biological things, expectations that we might have, but are those expectations based on the realities of biology, or are they based on the societal norms? How the average individual ages and how they behave. And I think, when we look at biology is quite variable across the board. And you're going to see people in their 50s who are quote unquote acting much older or behaving much older. And you're going to see people in their 90s and even beyond that are functioning at a far younger age, again, air quotes around that age, than other people that are much younger than them. And so I think more often than not, it's cultural expectations as opposed to the biological realities of life.
Now, you've often said that aging is not a disease, it's a process. How does the age-appropriate mindset contribute to the misconception that decline is inevitable?
Well, just the fact that we call it a disease is indicative of how this misconception has kind of crept into our society. It's not a disease. We're all aging. We're all aging at different rates. And so the reason it gets labeled as a disease is because it's associated with an increasing number of diseases as we get older. That doesn't make it a disease. That just makes it a risk factor for disease. And so this mindset that we are going to get sick or we are going to see declines in function as we get older just feeds the idea. We've talked in previous podcasts. You go to your doctor and your doctor says, "Oh, you're just getting older. Don't worry about it. It's just you're old." And that gets us thinking that, well, it's expected. I see all these people around me aging poorly, so that must be the expectation. And so the reality of the norm feeds our misconception of what is possible.
It almost sounds like the phrase "I think, therefore I am." Like I think I'm old, therefore I must be old. Um, is that kind of what you're saying? Is people are told like, "Hey, you're just getting older, so your body's declining, and that's it. You just have to accept that." They're like, "Well, I can't see as far as I once did, so I must be getting old." Or like, what do you think? Is it a mindset or is it more biological?
Well, I think as we've been talking, it's much more of a mindset than a biological factor. And yes, there's certain levels of biology that are contributing to this. You mentioned eyesight. Yeah, your eyesight's likely to decline over the course of your lifetime, but how much of that is preventable? How much of it is just simply wired into our genetics that as the clock ticks down, all these changes are going to happen? And you mentioned, I think, therefore I am. I think, is that what you said? Um,
Yep.
it takes me back to one of my favorite writers and kind of philosophers. I guess you'd call him a philosopher, is James Allen, and I love his book, As a Man Thinketh. And I've taken that to heart for so many years as I've read his stuff. If I think I can do something, I can do it. If I think I can't, I can't. And we are who we think we are. And if we are led to believe that we are getting old and we are declining, we will get old and decline. If we believe that aging isn't going to get the better of me, it's not going to get the better of me. If you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend, because aging is something we're all doing and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below, and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you, and now back to the podcast. So a lot of it is mindset.
Wow. That's for for the listeners, just keep thinking to yourself, age is just a number. I'm still young, I'm still youthful. Right? That's a great message. I love it.
Well, the message is,
So let's
stay as young as you can, as long as you can. So
so let's get back on track. Let's start with exercise. There's this idea that older adults should slow down or even avoid high intensity workouts. But what does the science actually say about what's safe and effective for older adults?
yeah, in my opinion, the science doesn't say enough. I don't think it's been adequately conducted. So we tend to test old people, and old people historically have been old, and that's how we then believe that people are. And so when you have a sick population of old people that, if they did these particular types of activities, would cause further harm to themselves, and then we base our decisions based off of that, and then try and generalize that to the rest of the population that maybe isn't old and sick, then we're doing a tremendous injustice. And so I don't think the science is good enough. And it's partly a fault of the way exercise science has been conducted and designed, but it's also a fault of how we interpret it and how we kind of recruit people for studies. If you are a relatively fit older adult, you are capable of doing as much as you possibly can. If you are sick, then yes, there's going to be restrictions on what you cannot do. But does that not mean that you can't, does that mean you can't just work on developing your weaknesses, getting stronger, and being able to do more? I don't think so. I think we are capable of doing far more at any age than the science tends to tell us we're capable of doing. And so this idea that older adults should slow down is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, because you shouldn't slow down. You're just going to perpetuate this idea of decline, and not only the idea of decline, but the natural decline. If I slow down, it's that whole principle of reversibility. How do we not remember that in exercise science, that if we
Right.
do less than we are accustomed to doing, we are going to revert to a lower level of fitness? If I age and I say, well, I got to slow down, well, I'm going to slow down faster than the person that says I'm not going to slow down. I'm going to try and do as much as I can. I might naturally slow down a little bit. I might not be as strong in my 80s as I was in my 60s or my 40s, but I'm going to be stronger than the rest of the population because I'm not trying to slow down. And then we get into this, well, your joints get older and you got to do less because you're more likely to get hurt. You're not more likely to get hurt if you exercise smartly. And if you're adequately hydrating, you're adequately recovering from the exercise, you might have to do a little bit less. That minimum effective volume, your maintenance volumes, they tend to shift a bit as we age. And certainly our maximum recoverable volume is going to decline a bit as we get older. But that doesn't mean we can't do more than we did the day before. We can continue to progress as long as we are alive. Now, depending on the level of progression early on in life, if I'm a power lifter in my 20s that's deadlifting 1,000 pounds, I'm not likely to continue to do that into my 80s. But if I'm somebody who was moderately active and has been exercising or not exercising for much of my life, I can continue to progress as long as I'm not kind of blowing up that genetic ceiling, where I'm not at that max point. And then it just kind of becomes a bit of maintenance. I mean, you look at, I've seen some videos recently of Dorian Yates, who's phenomenal bodybuilder in his day. He is still in great
Oh
shape.
boy.
I've seen images of Sylvester Stallone, is in his 70s, still in great shape. These are evidence that we can continue, maybe not at the same level. Arnold Schwarzenegger does not look like he did in his 20s, but I'll tell you, for a guy his age, he looks damn good. So don't tell me that I have to slow down, or that high intensity, which, remember, intensity itself is relative. And so pushing ourselves closer to our personal maximum is not going to cause us harm unless we do too much, too quickly, or do things wrong. And so I don't think the science is really there. I'm really in many ways disappointed with my field in terms of exercise science in regards to how we have conducted exercise for aging. And I've seen personally older adults initiate an exercise program and continue to progress and do very well into their later years. And I'm not going to be slowing down anytime soon. I'm going to keep doing what I can do as long as I can do it.
I don't know if Sylvester Stallone or uh, Arnold were great examples, just because obviously there's some antibiotic, there's some steroids that are involved, especially with Sylvester Stallone. He's admits that he's on HGH and testosterone replacement therapy, so that could play a factor. But I do agree with you that we should not stop. When I was personal training, I taught a boot camp, And the individuals that were 74 years old were actually stronger, had better endurance than those that were in their 20s, right? And so the stereotype is, oh, they're in an older age bracket, they're retired, they shouldn't be going as hard. They were going just as hard, if not harder, than the individuals that were stereotypically supposed to be younger, fitter, healthier. And the 74-year-olds just dominated. And it was across the board. It was at every location that I taught at. And then when I took on the activities director role and created the exercise program for the assisted living, we had individuals in their 80s and in their 90s. And again, they started off having a sedentary lifestyle where they weren't doing as intense exercise. And then I came in and we had to start off a little slow, obviously, because they went from not really moving to now doing exercises. But once they got to a certain level, we started cranking up the intensity step by step by step. And all of their strength, their balance, their stability, their range of motion, all of that increased. So I do agree, like, don't have it in the mindset, well, I'm old and this is just how it is. Like, keep pushing yourself. I could not agree more with you on that.
Well, I'm going to challenge you on the hormone replacement therapy piece because I think that's a personal
Please.
choice. And there's a big difference between, super optimal or super physiological levels of testosterone and maintaining a more optimal level as we age. And your generation is seeing tremendous declines in testosterone levels because of all the crap in our food and lifestyle and those types of things. And it's pretty well documented that testosterone levels have significant impacts on some of the disease processes that we experience as we age. And so for males in my age group who choose to elevate their testosterone to a optimal level and get the benefits of that in terms of maintaining muscle mass and physiological performance, I don't fault them for that. I think that is fine. I would say, yeah, the comparison to them in their younger years when they were probably taking more super physiological levels of testosterone is a bit different. But, an older male or even female, hormone replacement therapy can help us improve and maintain our function as we age. And so I want to be very careful in not saying that, it's not age appropriate in a sense to be taking testosterone as you age, or to have higher levels of testosterone. We want to have normal, and by normal I mean optimal levels of testosterone for our health and our performance. And so it kind of behooves us to try and maintain those levels as high as we possibly can. And if we look at, well, normal levels are this as you age, well, again, we're looking at normals that are based off of a sick and declining population. And so if you want to be above that normal range, but be, a physiologically normal, optimal level, then I'm all for it. Talk to your physician about it, consider that. And, I don't think we can judge or comment on somebody who is actually taking, testosterone in order to optimize their health as they are working to age well.
Yeah. That would be a great podcast episode if we could get an endocrinologist on here, one that talks about, hormone replacement therapy, and then another one that talks about how to naturally elevate or optimize your, get your baseline one up in a natural way. I think that would be really cool. Real attention grabbing. I'm already interested in it.
We've already had one guest who has talked about that, Dr. Gershon in season 4. And I also have another guest, by the way, coming up who will be addressing that, who's considered an expert on testosterone replacement and testosterone levels. And so we do have that coming up. Before we continue, I want to take a brief moment to highlight an affiliate brand that supports the work we do here. As always, this podcast isn't sponsored. Affiliate partnerships simply help us keep producing meaningful conversations around aging well. One product line I have personally vetted and believe in is Primadine from Oxford Healthspan. Their commitment to purity, scientific rigor, and thoughtful formulation stands out, and I use their products as part of my own wellness practice. If you want to support the podcast while exploring Primadine for yourself, you can find the link in the show notes.
I'm excited for this new season. All right. Well, Dr. Armstrong, what are some exercises people think they shouldn't do after, say, 50 or 60, but actually, in reality, they really should be doing?
Wow, that is a tough question because there's so many different exercises that people think are being told that they shouldn't do. And there are a lot of exercises people should not be doing at any age. But I think, we take it to our basic 5, all of those exercises can continue to be performed until you're dead. As long as you're capable of moving those patterns, you need to be able to be continuing to move those. So back squat, deadlift. And again, when we need to be a little bit kind of nuanced in how we talk about those particular exercises. As we get older, maybe, if we have back issues and things like that, the back barbell squat might not be the best exercise, but you can still squat. And it's just a matter of supporting the weight in a position where you can do the movement as effectively as possible without causing any harm or damage. I'll keep going back to my Zercher squat. I love that squat. I think is an exercise everybody should be doing, and you can continue to do as long as you're capable of doing it. The deadlift, I don't think anybody really should be doing a straight barbell deadlift unless their goal is to be doing a powerlifting competition, because I do think that particular exercise, because of the variability in our body structures, can put some individuals at greater risk of back injury unnecessarily. But use a hex bar, you take that movement, you put it in a much more functional pattern for that individual, it's going to be a very good exercise, and there's no reason why they can't continue to do that particular exercise. I would love to be able to do a Zercher deadlift as long as I can live. And I don't have quite the body type for it, or it's the flexibility to be able to do it, but it's a goal of mine to be able to do it. And if I can do that, well, even if it's a lightweight, if I can continue to do that well into my 80s, 90s, and so on, I'm going to be able to function much more effectively than if I can't do that exercise. And, there's not, you look at the movements themselves, there is nothing that we cannot do as we age, or there's nothing that we necessarily should not do. It's really a matter of what can we do and what can we do properly, and what load is appropriate in order to not cause injury doing that particular movement. I honestly cannot think of a single exercise that somebody really should not be doing in their 50s and 60s and beyond, if it is, a safe exercise for them to do at 40, 30, or 20.
Yeah, but on the other hand, are there exercises or training methods that truly aren't appropriate for individuals? I mean, regardless of age, doesn't just have to be that they're getting older, just regardless. And if so, how do we make that distinction?
Well, I think, there's a lot of exercises that we really should not be doing. I'm not a big fan at all of doing Olympic lifts for repeated movements. There's no reason to be doing, 15, 20 hang clean presses, that we see in certain types of training, because those are repetitive movements that can cause injury. And as we fatigue, the risk of that injury increases dramatically. So I think when we're looking at what exercises should not be appropriate, it's really more of not the movement itself, but how we sequence the repetitions and the performance in the training. And if it's something that's going to cause excessive fatigue, and as fatigue sets in, that fatigue increases the risk of injury, then it's not a smart movement. And there are certain exercises that should not be done in certain situations. I talk often when I talk about exercise in pregnancy that pregnant women should not be doing hang cleans and presses or pressing anything overhead with a barbell when there's that risk that that weight can drop and do damage to the fetus. Does that mean that they should never do that exercise? No. It just means there are certain times when maybe an exercise might not be appropriate. There may be certain movements that are not appropriate to do just in repeated fashion. I think of certain movements done in that quote unquote Tabata training, where you're doing like 20 seconds of as many reps as possible. When you're doing that type of exercise, you have to consider what effect that fatigue is going to have on the performance of that movement, and does that increase the risk of someone getting hurt? There are certain exercises. I don't think sit-ups are a great exercise because it puts unnecessary load on the spine. There's probably countless other ones that I could probably identify, but I'd prefer not to have a list of things that we cannot do or that are not appropriate, and allow people to determine for themselves what is appropriate or not appropriate based on their capabilities and their goals. And if we're focused on, the individuality, that principle of individuality in exercise, then we focus on, okay, this individual, what can they do or what can they not do? What should they do or not do? And not worry about what should Corbin do and what should Dr. Armstrong be doing. It's what is appropriate for you or me or anyone in our given circumstances.
You've mentioned normative data in the past episodes, those performance charts that compare age groups. How has the data contributed to the idea the decline is normal or inevitable?
Well, if you just look at any of the normative data that's come out of exercise science, one of my prime examples I use in class is the normative data for the bench press. And that if I am 20 and I can bench press my body weight, then I'm average. If I'm 60 and I can bench my body weight, I'm suddenly super normal. And it's like, how is that possible? I mean, I'm getting more fit just because I'm getting older. I'm not getting any stronger. I'm not improving my cardiovascular fitness, body composition. We talk about you can gain body fat and you're still healthy because, we expect old people to get fat, right? We expect old people to get weak. And so if you stay relatively strong, you're improving your fitness because you're more advanced than the rest of the population. And when we look at normative data, we look at normative data way too often because the normative data is based off of the averages. And so you're normal if you fall within about plus or minus 2 standard deviations of the norm. And if the average is getting lower as people age or as our society gets more unfit, then you're not really getting any better. You're just following the crowd. And if we want to be our best, then we have to be always improving. And there should be no reason why where we start in our 20s can't persist to a relatively reasonable degree as we move into our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on. I mean, a goal for me, and I joke about this in class, is that, my high school has reunions every 5 years. We have one coming up next year. So I have to really work on making sure I'm in best shape possible before that. But I always joke that at every reunion, I want to be in proportionally better shape than the rest of my classmates. And all I have to do in order to do that is simply maintain where I'm at from, reunion to reunion. And I joke that, when we're in our 80s, all the girls will be saying, "Oh, remember what a great athlete Jeff was in high school?" I wasn't that great of an athlete or anything else, but if you take all those people who were the really great athletes and they decline like we naturally see people as they age, and you take the average person and they just remain average, what that average performance was in their 20s and maintain that for 60 years, they're going to be seemingly in really, really great shape as they get older. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Many older adults are told it's normal to gain weight, lose muscle, or slow their metabolism as they age. So, how much of that is true biological and how much of it is behavioral or environmental?
Uh, I can't give exact numbers to that, but we're fed this kind of nonsense that it is normal and that we can expect, for example, with muscle mass, we're going to lose about, what is it, 20% of our body mass from the age of 25 to 50, an additional 40% from 50 to 80. But all of that is largely based on your activity levels. There's no reason why anybody should gain weight, and by gaining weight, they generally mean gaining body fat, because very few people are gaining muscle mass as they age. In fact, we see more muscle loss. Muscle loss is coming from inactivity. Metabolism is slowing from
Mm.
inactivity. And so the fact that it's normal is just the only reason it's normal is because it's what everybody else is doing. And if everybody is losing muscle mass, gaining body fat, and having their metabolism slow, of course that's going to be normal, but it's not optimal. And so we have to get our mindset away from this idea of what is normal and what is optimal. And what is optimal is totally within our control. So it is behavioral. Some of it is environmental because as we get older, circumstances tend to limit our ability to be as active. Maybe we get into communities where it becomes harder to get to a gym and doing some of those things. We have work, we have children, we have so many things going on in life that make it a little bit more difficult. I say difficult, not impossible, to be exercising regularly. And so a lot of it is behavioral choices and how we interact with our circumstances or our environment. And so it is not normal to gain weight, lose muscle, and have our metabolism slow as we age. We might see that in a slight level of decline, but if we are maintaining caloric balance as we age, we're not going to gain weight. It's just the fact. But people tend to gain weight because they're slowing down and they are maintaining the same eating habits that they had in their 20s when they had a higher metabolism, or they're not exercising as much to burn as many calories and they're still consuming as much energy as they were when they were younger. So, not biological by any great means, much more behavioral and environmental.
Wow. And the data out there reflects that as well.
Well, what data are we talking about?
Well,
I think common sense supports that that's the case. I mean, we know what affects muscle mass, what affects weight gain, what affects our metabolism. And if you look at the data out there, well, the data is going to say, yeah, it's normal to gain weight, lose muscle, and slow your metabolism as we age, because that's what is normal. But normal isn't optimal. And so if we're tracking in the science and the literature only what people are normally doing, then we're going to get misinformation in regards to what we can do.
yeah, I asked because I think it's important to recognize that when I was in college, that's something that they taught is the older we get, the more muscle mass we slowly start to lose. And I don't think anyone questioned that when we were taught it. And it seems today that hopefully our listeners are hearing you say this and they're like, whoa, there's a way to prevent that. And the way to prevent it is to stay active and maintain that muscle mass. So I'm not having a severe decline the older I get. And to have that mindset in order to combat it, I think that is just an amazing breakthrough game changer. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, for the record, you were never taught by me that that was the case.
No,
I've taught
no.
for more than 20 plus years, probably all 30 years of my career, that this idea that we lose muscle mass, gain body fat because we're aging is complete nonsense. And so we need to be challenging that. And I hope that every student I've ever had understands that this is not normal
Right.
decline. This is what everybody is doing.
So, speaking of data, what do you think the science says about protein needs, calorie intake, and maintaining muscle mass as we age?
Well, the science, I think, is doing a little bit more in this area. There's still a little bit of confusion in regards to protein needs and caloric intake. And particularly, a lot of that's coming from the longevity research that we're seeing. We know that, in animal models, that protein restriction and caloric restriction have a positive effect on longevity in animals. Unfortunately, we are not, we are animals, but we are not mice. We are not, many of the creatures that are being studied in the laboratory. And so we have to take a little bit of that with a grain of salt. And so as we look at longevity and aging well, protein probably should not be excessive as we age, or throughout our lifespan. We should try and manage as few calories as our body needs to function and maintain a healthy body composition for as long as possible. And then maintaining muscle mass, obviously, we need to be continuing to do resistive exercise or initiating resistance exercise if we have not done it as we age so that we maintain that muscle mass. But with all that said, there's also literature out there that supports that having adequate protein, and particularly branched chain amino acids, and most particularly leucine, is going to have a positive effect in terms of maintaining muscle mass, whether or not we even do resistance training. And so we have to kind of counter some of that longevity research with an understanding that it's more important, and because our lifespans are longer, we do need to maintain more muscle mass. And it's easier for us to lose that muscle mass if we're not getting adequate protein and if we're not resistance training. And a mouse lives for a few years, so that effect in protein is going to be less impactful than it will be for an older adult. And so I think the best recommendation when it comes to protein needs and caloric intake is to maintain a reasonable balance of protein relative to your activity level. And so trying to hit at least that 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight, that is the general recommendation. If you're doing an extensive amount of resistance training, probably pushing that up closer to about 1 gram per pound of body weight, not going beyond that, and focusing in on the quality of the protein that we are intaking. So lower amount of high quality protein as compared to a higher amount of poor quality protein is probably a good recommendation. And then with caloric intake, trying to periodically fast, perhaps appropriately intermittent fasting, where we're doing more of a circadian fast, where we're restricting evening caloric intake, trying to eat our last meal before 7 o'clock, a few hours before bedtime, and then allowing ourselves a good, probably at least 8 to 12 hours of not eating until we eat that, breakfast meal, is probably wise advice for somebody. But again, when we're looking at any kind of nutritional science and making decisions in regards to protein needs, caloric intake, and so on, a lot of it is going to come down to the individual. So we have to see what works for us personally. But I think there's enough evidence to show that, too much protein, too many calories are definitely not going to be good for our longevity and our health. But we need enough protein and the proper protein to be able to maintain our muscle mass. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah. Would you say I don't know, Are there any so-called age-appropriate diet trends you find especially misleading or counterproductive?
Um, that's a hard one to really answer. I mean, I don't know if I can think of age appropriate diet trends. Um, so I think as we look at just what is a healthy diet, that healthy diet is going to be healthy throughout our lifespan. And so, if we want to live well for a longer period of time, I think maintaining more of a Mediterranean Nordic type of diet where we're looking at really about 90% of our food intake being plant-based, particularly more legumes, more higher soluble fiber types of foods, and then restricting our protein intake to about 10% of those calories, or meat intake. So animal protein coming in about 9 or 10%, is probably the most appropriate approach. But there's no single diet that is going to be the most age appropriate. It's really just what works for us individually to help us to maintain our healthy lifestyle. And so I think it's misleading to think that as we age, healthy diet changes. I think that's where the misleading comes into. So if our viewers and listeners are being fed information from whatever influencers are out there, just weigh it against what is healthy overall, and don't buy into misleading information that might be counterintuitive, or they're just telling you that because you are a certain age, your diet, your behavior, your whatever has to be different because of that number on the calendar.
Something else that we also hear is that older adults just need less sleep. Do you think that's true, or is that another is that another myth that's wrapped in all the age-appropriate language?
Well, I think where that gets distorted is that older individuals tend to sleep less. And so we think that they need less sleep. I don't find any evidence out there that makes it any different as we age, how much sleep we need. Generally, we're looking at that window of about 7 to 8 hours being the most optimal, maybe needing a little bit more during the developmental years. So we're looking up to about 25 years of age. But once you hit about 25, you're pretty consistent at 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Um, Getting 6 hours, for some people, there are those who can function extremely well and can recover from that. But you get anything below 6 hours, you are not going to be functioning very well. You're not recovering well. Your brain is going to suffer from it. And so I think that is one of those myths that we just got to get past, because if anything, older people might need a little bit more sleep to allow for that brain to get adequate recovery and clear up all the gunk that could potentially be leading to dementia down the road.
How do changes in sleep quality and recovery affect performance and health across a lifespan? And what do people need to do to counteract that?
Sleep. Yeah, I mean, it's the changes in sleep quality recovery affect performance at any age. So it's not a matter of, well, we're getting older, that, if I'm not getting as much sleep, I'm going to have even more detrimental health issues. When you were young, you still need that sleep for the brain to be able to process, to function, to clear things out. You need cortisol to go through its proper cycles to help maintain our over hormonal levels. And so changes in sleep quality can be hugely detrimental to our performance and our health anywhere in the lifespan. And so the best way to counteract that is proper sleep hygiene, as we've talked about on this podcast. Having a regular sleep time, bedtime, trying to be that as consistent as possible with that as possible, getting up at the same time, whether it's a weekend day or a weekday, You want to make sure that you're going to bed, getting up at the same time so that we have that natural circadian rhythm consistently across the calendar, and preparing ourselves for good sleep. So trying not to be on our computers, be on electronics late at night, trying to eat our last meal a little bit earlier, not eating right before bed, not drinking alcohol or any fluids within at least an hour. I would say alcohol consumption should be at least 3 or more hours before bedtime. Any fluids should be about an hour before bedtime. You want to stop drinking fluids so that we can get a good quality night's sleep. Having the room at a proper temperature, having a good bed, darkening the room, dimming the lights as we get closer to bedtime. We've talked about all these things on numerous different episodes of the podcast. Getting ourselves prepped for a good night's sleep is the best thing that we can do to counteract some of the ill effects that poor sleep quality and recovery can come from not getting enough sleep. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. Um, so beyond the physical, how does the age appropriate label shape the way that people connect socially? And what I mean by that is who they date, the hobbies they pursue, or how they see their purpose.
Well, I think if you have enough money, it doesn't matter how old you are. You can date anybody younger. But I think it shapes how people perceive what we are doing. You mentioned dating. You know, there's that age appropriate piece is a bit of a misnomer when you get in there. I mean, love is love. You're going to find love where you find love. Now, I can understand where, in my 60s, if I were single again, God forbid I ever be single again, and I'm trying to date somebody in their 20s, it would freak me out because there's such a cultural rift between, what I'm used to and what the average 20-year-old female would be like now. And so it wouldn't be a matter of age appropriate. It would just be a matter of, what's going to benefit me the most socially. And so, when we look at the labels that people put on us based on our age, they're just labels that people are putting on us. And so who's to tell you what is appropriate? I mean, obviously, there is a certain threshold of age that is, certainly appropriate. And, some might argue, well, that's a cultural norm as well. But I would still say, if you're in your, anything really above your 20s and you're dating somebody under the age of 20, then yeah, there's some issues going on there. But,
Yeah.
what you want to do, if your hobby is something that is, I'm trying to think of something that's really kind of associated more with the young. If I'm in my 80s and I want to, be playing Call of Duty, then play Call of Duty. So what? Who's to tell you, well, you're too old to be doing that, or that you can't really do computer stuff because you're too old? That's all BS. It's like we are being shaped by our society, and who is society to tell us what we should or should not be doing if it is morally not objectable? And so when we look at purpose as well, purpose is individual. And so again, there's no age appropriate label to put on, living with purpose. We should all be pursuing purpose as we get older, and maybe that purpose changes a little bit as we age, as we move from, early career to family, so you think of a moving from single guy to husband to father to grandfather to, retiree to, whatever. Those are, they're associated with aging, but they're not necessarily, when is it appropriate? I mean, I had my first kid, I was 42. Is that age inappropriate? I should be having my kids in my 20s. So who's to tell us what is appropriate when it comes to some of those labels? Is that hopefully answering your question there?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Well, part of me is giggling because you mentioned the 80-year-old who wants to play Call of Duty, and there actually is an 80-year-old on YouTube that plays Call of Duty, and he does it in those like group like shooting things, and he just dominates. It cracks me up because he's so serious, but it's kind of his little passion and it's his hobby and it's out of the norm. But you know what? Good on him. But it goes with everything that you're saying. Like, don't don't just get stuck in your category of your age bracket, your norm. Like, get outside of the norm. If that's your passion, then go for it.
Well,
So
I would make the argument as
pretty cool.
well. We should not be formulating, age appropriate labels on people. You just said, you're cracking up because this guy's in his 80s. It shouldn't even be a question. So what? The guy's 80. I mean, isn't that normal? I mean,
No, it's
everybody likes to play this
just
game, so let's play.
right. Well, I guess it'd be the same thing as seeing like I don't know, like if you see a mascot at a sporting event, then you're like, oh, that's he's in the element because our brains associate that. But then say if you're on the bus and you're taking public transportation and there's a mascot just randomly there, you would be like, that's not something I'm normally seeing. And so your brain kind of just laughs about it because you see a lot of streamers on YouTube and they're usually just young people and between the brackets of 20 to early 40s, but then you see someone in their 80s and it's not something you normally see. But you're right, I shouldn't make the judgment. My brain just that's out of the norm. But it's so funny because even though it is out of the norm and it's an outlier, it's a dominant outlier and it's really it's cool to see. So not trying to be judgmental, just trying to say, oh, that's something you don't normally see, but um, it's awesome when you do. So, so do you think that there's often, they say that there's often a kind of social policing that happens when older adults do things that younger peoples do, like when they start a new career or they travel solo or even dress a certain way? And how do those judgments affect mental and emotional health?
That's probably a little bit out of my realm in terms of how they directly affect. I mean, I'm certainly not versed in the literature in terms of mental or emotional well-being that comes from social policing. But I think we can extrapolate enough of understanding some of the literature that's out there in terms of mental and emotional health as we are judged personally, as we are socially isolated, or as people are bullied. All those types of things have a very negative impact on the well-being of others. And so when we put judgment on somebody for, you know, I would go with dressing a certain way, and I would personally do this. I mean, I've seen women in particular. More and more, you're seeing men too that are like, dude, you don't have the guns that you had when you were in your 20s. Why are you wearing that tank top, kind of thing? But that is on me for that judgment. I mean, if a person feels comfortable dressing the way they want to dress, and it's not, a, you know, not revealing to a point that it's offensive or just inappropriate at any age, then let them dress that way. And certainly, traveling solo, in many cases, you know, God bless the people that are able in their older years to travel solo, because in many cases they might have to because they've lost their mate, their partner, and they don't have maybe the same social connections to be able to travel with others, and so they're getting out and they're interacting with other people. That's great. Do that. There's nothing wrong with that. And starting new careers, I think we have kind of mandated that people should be thinking about retiring in their 60s, and we think there's something wrong with somebody who decides to start a new career while in their 60s. Personally, I think if we're going to be living longer, if I want to live to 120, I don't want to retire in my mid 60s and have another 50, 55 years of having to live off of my retirement income. So I want to keep working. And so, yeah, there is a lot of the social policing that's out there, but it probably does more damage than it does any certain good. And so when we are judging other people, we are, putting pressure on them that might cause some level of social or emotional health, dishealth. So, yeah, just mind your own business. If somebody wants to do something as they're getting older, let them do
Mhm.
it.
Now, how does social connection itself serve as a pillar of aging well? And how can we build communities that reject age appropriateness, thinking of favor, inclusion, vibrant, and participation at every age?
Well, I think, when we're looking at trying to get people connected as they age, the more we can build communities that foster interaction between all ages, we're going to see a much healthier, much more productive society. And so if we could build communities where, maybe you have retirement communities that are closely linked to, primary schools, even high schools, to where, the older population are able to come in, they're able to interact with the kids and, help with teaching them, help with, kind of educating them in terms of their lifestyle and getting the benefit of the joy of kind of interacting with kids. And then on the other end, you have colleges. If we can build colleges in close association with senior centers and senior communities, then those seniors can come, they can take classes at those universities, they can interact with the younger students, they can teach students from their wisdom, and also the students can learn from them, because they can learn, history from them. They can also, if you have, health professions, you have nursing programs, OT programs, physical therapy programs, they have a patient pool that they can actually get some experience from that's going to benefit them as they move on into their careers. And we know, and we saw this in COVID, that when people were isolated, their health declined dramatically. And how many people died during COVID because they were shut off from their family and their friends and their communities? And so if we can build communities, bring back the front porch when we build houses, build communities where people are able to interact within all generations, and then, make it age appropriate to be interacting across all the generations. We had Becky Blue on, I think she was early in season 4, and she makes it a goal to have friends in, every decade. And I kind of joked with her, so what's that mean for the kids that are under 10? But, it's, being able to interact and have community across the lifespan is so productive for all of us. We should all be interacting with people of all ages. We should have friends and associations that are much older than us and also younger as well, because that's where we're going to benefit ourselves and we're going to benefit society. And so putting these age appropriate restrictions on people based on their social connections is just stupid.
And if age appropriate is the wrong term, what's the right one? And how can we talk about adaptation and safety without reinforcing limitations?
Well, I think, when we talk about adaptation and safety from an exercise standpoint, or really adaptation in any aspect of the SPIES model, safety is the same. I mean, it's do it in proper technique, do proper intensity, know what you're doing before you do it, and know that, the principle of that adaptation is, small baby steps forward are what's going to cause us to adapt. And so the idea of progressive overload doesn't change no matter what our age is. It's a matter of where am I right now? Where's the next step in adaptation that's going to occur? And so the term age appropriate definitely is a wrong term. Do I have one that's better for it? I don't really think so, because, it's, how are you going to label it? I mean, there's no level of appropriateness or disappropriateness for any individual based on their age. So, um, maybe age optimal. I don't know. I don't think there's a good term, and I don't think we need a term there. It's just like, what is appropriate? Boom. Has nothing to do with age.
How can listeners evaluate what truly is appropriate for them based off their goals, their health status, and values, instead of what's appropriate for their age group?
Well, I think having knowledge of what they are capable of doing. It's like, what do you want to do? And that's what, if it fits your goals, then it's appropriate for you. And, if I want to be a power lifter in my 80s, then that's appropriate for me. There's nothing to say that, at this particular age, all of these different activities need to be crossed off your list. You can't do them anymore. And as you get older, then these particular activities you have to do, but you shouldn't be doing them at a younger age. It's really a matter of evaluating what are your goals, and are you capable of doing those? If you want to do them and you're not capable, what do you have to do to change yourself so that you can accomplish those particular goals? And, we all have our individual goals and values, and nobody should dictate whether those are appropriate or inappropriate for us based on, just a number, what our license says that we are. If it says, you're this age, you can't do this anymore. Sorry.
So, speaking of that, what is one example from your life or your practice where someone defied the age appropriateness and the whole stereotype itself, and then they thrived because of it?
I think probably one of my favorite examples is this guy, Harry, who I worked with. It's probably been, sadly, almost 30 years ago, because it was before I started my PhD. But I was doing personal training at a Jewish community center in Pittsburgh, and he had seen a tough study that was done on seniors living in, a kind of senior living community. And they did resistance training with the individuals and showed that the majority of them significantly decreased their dependence on their walkers and other assisted devices. And so Harry determined he was going to gift himself for his 84th birthday with a personal trainer, and he was going to stop using his cane. And so I had the opportunity to work with Harry. I think I worked with him for about 3 months maybe, and to be able to watch him, the guy shows up, he's got, is not dressed like your standard gym goer. He had, kind of these thick horn-rimmed glasses. He was wearing a polo shirt, checkered Bermuda shorts, dark socks, and brown loafers, and walking with his cane. And he walks super slow. And some of our older listeners might remember Tim Conway and his one comedic bits that he used to do with the old guy that walked super, super slow. That's kind of how Harry walked. And I was in the habit of finish an exercise and I'm booking across the gym to get to the next exercise. And then I got to remember, oh, here comes Harry behind me walking super slow. And so we did a lot of exercises working on building the core musculature around the hips and postural and everything to be able to propel himself with greater strength and power. And, within that 3-month period that I worked with him, he was less dependent on his cane and he was actually carrying it less. And I thought that was, really kind of one of those shattering the norms where he defied the age-appropriate stereotype and was, I'm going to start lifting weights in my 80s and I'm going to stop using this cane. And another one I think of is a friend of mine, I won't use her name. She was actually a guest on this podcast, I think 2 seasons ago, but she had decided she was going to donate a kidney. It was something she wanted to do for many, many years. and just decided, I got to do it now, or, I'm getting older, I might not be able to do it later. And so she just decided she was going to donate a kidney. Wasn't anybody in particular in mind, but she had to get in shape to be able to do it, to be ready for the surgery. And so she hired another one of my former students as a personal trainer to work with her to get in shape. She donated a kidney, had great recovery, and she got so interested in lifting weights to the point where, and she's about my age, so this woman that's in her the mid 60s, decided, she really enjoyed lifting weights and deadlifting and things, and she was going to start doing powerlifting. And, who starts powerlifting in their 60s? Not too many people. And so I think those are great examples of people who, and there are countless others that are maybe not personal examples that I can think of, that just challenge what is age appropriate.
Now, if you could rewrite the script on aging, what phrase or mindset would you want to replace the age appropriate with?
I think probably the best phrase that I use almost daily in my own, journaling and my mantra is be your best today, be better tomorrow. And don't let anybody tell you that age is going to restrict you from being better tomorrow. We can always improve ourselves, whether it's strength, cardiorespiratory, or spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, and socially. So don't put a label on it based on how old you are. Put it on what are you capable of doing. And if you're not capable of doing something but you want to do it, then do what you can do to be able to do it. So yeah, be your best today, be better tomorrow. Maybe carpe memento. Just seize the day.
Carpe memento.
You might not have tomorrow. You got to seize the day today.
And for our listeners who have internalized this message, that certain goal, movements, or dreams are no longer age appropriate, what's the first step that they can take today to begin reclaiming their potential and aging well?
Set one goal today, something that you don't believe you can do, and set out to do it, and take the first baby step to do it. That's, I think, the best thing that we can do is take, one baby step at a time, and you don't have to kind of reclaim all of your potential at once. Just find one aspect of your potential and claim it and approach it. Do what you can do to get stronger. Do what you can do to improve your cardiorespiratory health, improve your intellectual health, well-being. Pick something and just do it.
So to summarize, don't get into the whole stigma of age appropriate. Age appropriate is just a term that's thrown around, but you yourself have the authority to change the definition of what truly is age appropriate for you. Don't just place yourself in a box. Challenge yourself daily, whether you have a passion or a hobby and you want to get out there and take back your life. You have the full authority to do so. Do an exercise. We recommend our Superior 7 or our Main 5, right? Those are great things that you can do at any age to continue to move forward. If you want to socially get out there and you want to travel the world, do it. If you want to write that book, do it. No matter what it is, nothing is too age appropriate for you to hinder you and prevent you from aging well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Aging Well podcast. Please like, subscribe, or follow, and share this episode with a friend. And be sure to visit the affiliate links in the description below. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep aging well.